When we talk about power and we talk about spirituality and we talk about our unique presence within this world and what we have access to, what I want to try to convince you to do is to avoid the trap of good and evil. Avoid it as much as possible. Whenever you hear or feel yourself using the dichotomy that I am good and that is evil, or that is good and that is evil, pause. Just pause. If at the end of the 15 minutes I can sort of convince you to consider that, that'll be success. Second is resist the passions of zealotry. Slow down. When you feel that fire coming up in you that we must march, we must walk forward shoulder to shoulder against our enemies in order to overcome something, we should pause and we should think, who walks on foot and marches? Maybe pawns. Am I sure that I am good and they are evil? It's all I'm asking you, just to consider. Resist just for a moment. Next is do not take Dayquil from strangers. If I can convince you to not do that, goal 3 will be successful, and you'll figure out that why in a second. And fourth is pause before you fight demons, especially before you try to kill them. This is my objective today. At the end of this, I will see if I've succeeded. If not, please tell me. No, I'm not convinced, and I will respect that, and we will try to tango with that as we go forward. So let's try this. Obviously, we talked about pawns. I don't need to go further into this. I feel like we have a good grasp that the pawns within the realm of spirituality, within the realm of our engagements, are those who walk on foot. So we start today in this lecture with a little bit of it's a kid's story that is very violent and gruesome and horrible, and it's called the First Crusades. And the First Crusades were an atrocious event that took place when the Byzantine Empire was under attack, normal transitions of power. But what they did is this man by the name of Pope Urban II, the man here in the blue circle, was called upon by the Byzantine Empire to rally the armies of Europe. And Pope Urban II stood up in Clermont, France in 1095 and said, among many other things, take the crusade. And if you I'm paraphrasing greatly, take the crusade, and all who die by that way, whether by land or by sea or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of their sins. This I grant them through the power of God, which I am invested. Now, this is one account. There was many others, and he said many other things, but I want you to look at these words for just a moment. Remission of sin, the power of God. The Pope was invested in this, that if people marched forward, or rather marched east, that the Pope would immediately spiritually cleanse them, transform them from sinners into forgiven people, that they would be able to access God. And this was a huge deal in the Middle Ages and the 11th century, and it worked. This Pope Urban II, as you can see in this artwork, stirred his country, noble, rich, poor alike. And France was a beehive of activity, and soon so was Europe. And as the armies marched into Asia Minor, what is now called Turkey, they did horrible things as they marched to Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem, they said, and I'll get to this in a minute, was what was taken by what they called the Antichrist. The problem with the Crusades, and I'm not going to get into this historical debacle, is what they were comprised of. It was men, women, children, families that were poorly garnished. They were poorly supplied, and so they had to raid and pillage along the way. These foot soldiers were commanded to take what they needed, for the army of God was surely righteous. Surely that any action that they did, just as Julius said, was not theirs to bear, and God would forgive them because they were on a holy crusade to free the lands of what they said was next, which was, oh, what a disgrace if such a despised and base race of people which worship demons should conquer a people which has the faith of the omnipotent God and is made glorious in the name of Christ. This was intense. And remember, the person who said this was deeply and earnestly seen to be the direct link to the kingdom of God. So I want you to bring in your mind those who are pawns again. All right, because there were many who followed this, many who deeply believed that they could cure themselves, heal their spiritual sins, and enter into the kingdom of God if they followed what this man would say. And maybe what we will say is, well, of course, Pope Urban II was probably directed by greed or avarice or corruption, or was he a false leader? Or maybe he was even evil. Yes, that would be quite easy to say to someone who says that, I suppose. But what we have to understand is there were many people saying it. Many hermits, such as, I'm not going to get into this man. I have a particular problem with him. But look at where his hand is pointing. Where is his hand pointing, friends? Pointing forward. And all the people look up to where he's pointing and say, we will march that way. We will go that direction and do that thing. Many were pawns in this children's story, in this horrible, horrible moment in our world history. So what I want to say, and I'm going to make a claim, and you may not agree with it, I would like to say that only pawns speak of good and evil because it is only the pawns that have the right to speak about good and evil, because other players on this interesting game of chess, we endeavor, move differently, see things differently, and understand there's a greater game afoot. But pawns, they do what? They move forward. And spiritually, and this is what is important within our spiritual things, we have to, one, ask ourselves, if we find ourselves being pushed forward, are we playing the role of the pawn? Are we seeing our enemies as the evil side and that we are good? But we're medicine people, we're spiritual people. And what we would say is, no, for I have chosen the red pill. I have been offered spiritual enlightenment. I have seen it how it really is. And I have taken, just as our hero here did, took the red pill, became a badass ninja, stopped bullets with his mind and the force. He saw into the very fabric of existence and reality, and bada bing, bada boom, he did a lot of cartwheels or whatever this is, and he was able to be the chosen one because he took this seemingly Dayquil-esque pill. He took this and it allowed him to wake the fuck up. But did it? That if we stop the story there, if you took the red pill, you wake up spiritually. But if we keep watching that story, as we are watching the story in our world, there's a lot of people who feel that they have woke the fuck up, isn't there? Lots. So many people believe this. Now, I'm not saying that any of these people are right or wrong. That's not my interest. As a scholar in mysticism and as a scholar in the spiritual, my goal is not to say, well, clearly that's the bad guy and clearly that's the good guy. That's not my point, because if I did that, I would be trying to convince you to march. That's not my role. My role is to ask you to do what our teachers have done for a moment, which is to step away from the acolytes, step away from the crowds. Christ was often seen in the Gospels walking away from his most ardent disciples because he needed time to understand and to wonder why people were not seeing what he was seeing. The Prophet Muhammad, at the ripe age of 40, deeply distressed by the intra-clan conflicts with the Quraysh in the city of Mecca where the Kaaba exists, he needed to get out of that place. And so he went up into the hills above the city and meditated into the Archangel Gabriel, here depicted in this image, came to him and instructed him to recite what was then the Quran, within. Similar, we find Siddhartha Gautama. We now know him as the Buddha, but he was a prince. He was a wealthy benefactor of a land full of riches, that he was so distressed by the suffering and death that he decided he must find another way. He did not march. And in fact, when he did march side by side with the monks called the ascetics, who thought if only we tear our clothes off and we don't eat food and we sit in absolute austerity, that then we'll reach God. Most people don't know that the Buddha almost died doing that. He died, he passed in, he didn't die, he passed into starvation and he passed out. And if it wasn't for a young girl feeding him rice porridge on the side of the road, we would not have the Buddha as we know it. And then, of course, there's Moses and the burning bush, but I don't really know what's going on there, to be honest. But here we have an interesting series of events where we start to see things once we've taken the red pill. We start to see malicious things, dark forces that are organized and who are telling us about dark things. And we find ourselves one time crossing the dots until we are like Tom Hanks chasing the Illuminati through the catacombs of Rome until we figured out we have found truth. We have found something. And aha, there it is. We took the red pill. We see truth. But do we? Did spiritually, do our red pills, whether they are metaphors or actual things, does our medicine, does it always show us truth here? Did this bring Neo out of the matrix? People would say, yeah, look at him. He's obviously out of these weird, creepy energy pods. He met the archetype and kicked some ass. But then all of a sudden something weird happens. Keep watching the Matrix. Keep going into the story. And you'll watch, all of a sudden, Neo uses the Matrix powers outside of the Matrix. Well, what does that mean? I thought he was out of the Matrix. What is important to understand when we are grappling with spiritual concepts and the many worlds that exist is, first of all, our hero Neo didn't leave the Matrix. He went from one Matrix into another. Like the Alex Gray painting, which is so amazing and beautiful and absolutely connected to something that is real. Neo went from this Matrix to that one. That's all that happened. The entire movie was him going from one reality to the next, and the conflict and the struggles that arrive. But as students of mysticism, we have to ask which one is good, which one is bad, which one is real. And the answer is they all are. This doesn't give us truth. Our medicine doesn't give us truth. It gives us the option to see. And I wish Amy was still here, because her beautiful partner and a beautiful teacher of ours, Moises, once said to my mother, demons can wear angel masks and angels can wear demon masks. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't know. So, but let me ask you a question. We're getting close to the end. Do these men know? Do these men know what they are doing? Maybe these men do. For God's sakes, they have this Archangel Michael above them with a sword ready to smite their enemies. By the way, this is a painting or a drawing literally called The Siege of Jerusalem. Look how enthused those slightly bewildered soldiers are that someone is flying above them. But they believe. But let me ask you now a question. Who here is the good guy? Who? Which one? Who? These are pawns. Who's woke? The answer that our spiritual teachers admonish us to consistently grab a hold of, and we are in the United States at such a powerful time to capture this, is the only thing that is here is violence. That is what using good and bad or good and evil does. is it allows us to freely use violence within our world. And this is why being a pawn is so dangerous, and why I am almost begging us as a community to be slow, just slow. If I can convince you of anything in this time, is to go very slowly with who you decide is good and who you decide is evil or bad. Because what might end up happening is one day you find yourselves among these men. And at that moment, you realize, oh, there's just violence. Our teachers are asking us to do something different. Now, this is just a representation. There are 120,000 more prophets and wise men and women and mystics and spiritual elders who understand that it is love and peace and our willingness to pause violence that will help us in our spiritual quest to grow, to transform ourselves into what we are trying to be. By taking the time in our lives, and this is what I would like to say, to be alone, to be slow, to contemplate the many realities that are in our lives, we gain our power. So let's do this together. Take a big breath in. After all that, and breathe out. A quiet moment. The 4 goals. Unmute yourself, if you'd be willing. All right, guys. How'd I do? Did I convince you to potentially resist and avoid the trap of good and evil? Yes or no? And if, be honest with me. If it's no, tell me no. We need to get this conversation right. Yeah?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of.
Sort of. Good. No, I appreciate it. That's honest. How about zealotry? Can we pause our zealotry as students of mysticism and spirituality? Not that it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. But can we pause it so that we can see the realms of and worlds that we exist within?